But I believe that fish scales migrated into the mouth and became teeth over thousands of years. And that's my first lecture, okay? By the way, they're still teaching that. We were at a big university here just last spring, back on the East Coast, and I said that. This girl raised her hand and she said, I just learned that in class, that fish scales moved into the mouth and became teeth. I mean, there's no relationship whatsoever between scales and teeth. Embryologically, physiologically, morphologically, no relationship at all.
Then could you possibly explain placoids for us, i.e. sharks, rays and chimeras? What I mean is the fact that their entire body is coated with dermal denticles, which, if the words derma and denti haven't given away, literally means skin teeth. The scales have the same basic structure as vertebrate teeth, consisting of a central pulp cavity supplied with blood which is surrounded by the tougher layers of dentine and enamel. This is a fact discussed in numerous papers available at the time this video was first published. In fact, the similarities are so close that I found one article discussing how to identify dermal denticles of extinct rays due to how difficult it can be for even a specialist of the field to differentiate them from ray teeth. That's how similar they are. Rays are actually really amazing in demonstrating the similarities between dermal denticles and their teeth. If you look at ray teeth and the teeth of certain sharks, you can see just how this could have easily happened. What I'm referring to is the fact that most rays and certain sharks look like they have a serious case of hypodontia, and you can see how these teeth interlock just like scales. Now, of course, there are a wide range of scales in modern fish today, and what is even weirder is the fact that some fish have more than one type of scale. The denticle herring is the at-risk species of fish which is the last remaining Denticiptidae, and this 15-centimeter fish has scales similar to what we think of when we think of most fish, covering the majority of its body. But this is where it gets freaky. On its head and around its mouth, it has dermal denticles, i.e. skin teeth. In fact, its Latin name, Dentitus caputitus, literally means tooth head. So all this knowledge was readily available to you at the time, and yet you decided to make no use of it, and instead mock the possibility of what I have just laid at your feet.
But that was my first lecture at Baylor Dental College. So two of my students challenged me after class that day. Dr. Martin, have you ever investigated creation science? Now, this is 1971. We could only find two books on the subject. One was called The Genesis Flood by Dr. Henry Morris and John Whitcomb, and that's the book that really got this creation movement started, I think. And so that got me thinking. And then we decided we're going to look at the assumptions that the evolutionists make. And so we did. We started looking at the assumptions, which I'd never learned in college. They still don't teach them in college. You don't learn the assumptions behind evolution. So we looked at the assumptions, and I realized they're not valid. And then we started looking at some animals. Now, this is probably about 1972. The first animal we looked at is a little insect called a bombardier beetle. I'm sure many of you have heard of the bombardier beetle. It's a little insect that mixes chemicals that have such a violent reaction. It's like an explosion, and that's its defense mechanism. I mean, it shoots its enemies out of twin tail tubes that it can aim out the side, out the front. How would that evolve? See, I'm thinking, here you have this little insect that needs all its parts, or when it mixes these chemicals and they have this violent reaction, it's going to blow itself up. And splattered bug pieces don't evolve. And so we looked at that little insect, and then we started looking at some other things, and I'll be sharing more of those as we go along. And so I ultimately became a biblical creationist.
So proud of yourself, aren't you, Martin? Tricked by a couple of students. If you have ever picked up a beetle and given it a look over before placing it back down, only to later smell your hands, you've likely noticed a rather repugnant odour. That is because many beetles rely on chemical defences, and one such chemical is hydroquinone. Now, this substance is primarily utilised to harden the insect shell, but as a secondary role, it is also utilised as a chemical defense because of its foul smell and taste. Similarly, hydrogen peroxide is a naturally occurring byproduct of insect metabolism, and it is this which, when mixed with hydroquinone, makes the bombardier beetle bombardier. But when the chemicals meet, they don't simply explode like that. They need the correct pressure and the right amount of catalyst. All they actually do is oxidize for an even more toxic and repugnant chemical, and this was something demonstrated to Duane Gish, one of the original proponents of this claim, in a lab before he said, "It doesn't matter, it still proves design." As for how we went from sickly chemical to explosive reaction, there are theoretical solutions I can put forward. Predators typically attack from behind, especially with beetles which often have powerful mandibles at the business end. Therefore, having a load of nasty chemical which puts off a predator at the rear isn't really a bad thing to have. The more they have, the more likely it is to smell and the better the beetle's chance. But there is a limit to surface tension, i.e. how much of the liquid could be stored on the exterior of the shell before it starts falling off. But if, over several generations, a pit was to develop in the beetle's abdomen, it would increase the surface area, effectively increasing the amount which could be carried at any one time, meaning a better chance of survival for that beetle. Given time, this pit could evolve like the eye to become enclosed, which would offer directional amplification. So like a loudspeaker, but with smell, concentrating the scent on the predator. Likewise, the catalyst needed to cause the explosive chemical reaction doesn't have to do that job right away. If it evolved from the lower end of the range, gradually increasing the amount of catalyst each generation, it would lead to a slightly more aggressive chemical producing heat. And if you did not know, heat is a great way to increase pungency. Heat causes particles to vibrate more, and that increases the number of particles which break free into the air, increasing the smell and deterring the predator. That's why something straight out the freezer doesn't smell anywhere near as much as something taken just out the oven. So over time, the catalyst could gradually increase, causing those with it in the higher limits to survive more often. If one beetle evolved with too much catalyst too quickly, it would die. But evolution is not on the individual scale. It exists on that of the population. The other 300 to 500 beetle brothers and sisters would each be different with varying amounts of catalyst, therefore have different chances for survival. So evolution is the cap preventing the catalyst from evolving too fast. If the shell is too weak, the beetle dies, but not the rest of the population with lower rates of the catalyst. However, as the shell around the chamber area gets harder over generations, that allows for more and more of the catalyst to be added, resulting in a chambered explosion which the beetle can control without being turned into little chunks of beetle. Note the fact that I did not need to invoke magic. Now, this is just one of the ways it could have occurred. But rather than attacking what science hasn't gotten around to, because that's all it is, it's not it can't explain it, it's just nobody's really concentrated on this area, why don't you concentrate on what it has? There are countless other examples which cripple any alternative hypothesis besides evolution, which is why it is classed as a scientific theory.
Then in 1982, I resigned my professorship at Baylor College of Dentistry and went on to go to Dallas Theological Seminary. And there is where I spent 4 years with my wife typing my papers and staying up late at night with a herniated disc and things like this. And so we made it through seminary. And now my wife thought she married a dentist. I'm not sure she's sure now what she married. But we are now, I guess, kind of itinerant teachers. So today we're going to talk about this subject that has been important to me because probably the biggest spiritual struggle of my life was going from being an agnostic Zen Buddhist evolutionist to becoming a Christian, at which point I became a theistic evolutionist. I still had the Big Bang and the billions of years, but now I'm a Christian. And then after studying with these dental students, I became a biblical creationist, which means the universe is about 6,000 years old. There was a global flood about 4,500 years ago, things like that. That's where I am today. So today I hope we can give you some of the evidences, and we'll talk a little bit about worldviews. Psalm 11:3 says, if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? Well, what is the foundation of this whole evolution creation issue? Well, it's the book of Genesis and in the Bible. And yet most people say, well, you can't trust that book. You just can't. It's not true. It's poetry, things like this. Well, let's think about this for just a minute, just to clear that up. Are the early chapters of Genesis just symbols and poetry and allegory? Well, Hebrew poetry, the form is subject, verb, object. God created the heavens. God created the earth. God created the fish. That is Hebrew poetry. Hebrew narrative is verb, subject, object. Created God the heavens. Created God the earth. Created God the fish. Well, what way does it show up in the Bible, in the Hebrew? Now, in English, God created the heavens. In Hebrew, it shows up verb, subject, object. By the way, it does in Spanish also. I think it does in German. But in English, you would say, well, yeah, that's poetry. No, it isn't. It is Hebrew narrative. So the early chapters of Genesis, grammatically and syntactically, are straightforward Hebrew narrative. They're not poetry. They're not symbols. They should be taken literally just like they say. So beast means beast. Water means water. Whatever it says, that's what it means. Straightforward narrative. There's a little bit of poetry thrown in there when Adam says, she is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. There's a little bit of poetry, but for the most part, it is straightforward narrative. And you can tell when you read it. So it's not symbol. So the foundation and the doctrines of the Bible then are built on the early chapters of Genesis, and the early chapters of Genesis then teach us the true history of the beginning of everything. But you see, a lot of people don't like that idea.
Whilst I do appreciate what you are attempting to argue, Genesis being one of the easiest books in the Bible to refute, I would be made as dishonest as you if I let your misportrayal of biologically literate Christians go unchecked. Poetic language and symbolism does not simply mean poetry. Poetic is an adjective, a descriptive, not a noun, and you didn't even address symbolism in any sense. Consider Superman in the 2013 Man of Steel. There is a lot of symbolism and poetic intent, some of it subtle, other parts not so much. Now, the movie isn't spoken. It isn't line by line, verse by verse like a poem. It is formed like a depiction of events, a story, a narrative, and yet there's undeniably poetic styles and symbolism throughout, ironically pertaining to Jesus Christ. In many ways, Man of Steel had a massive Jesus fetish. Now, this isn't a new revelation. I now draw your attention to Aesop's fables, wherever they actually originated from. They are tales which have shared many mediums from art to song and, yes, poetry in a few instances. But the key here is that each of them are poetic. Each of them show the same symbolism regardless of the medium. Noting the structure of Scripture does not refute the claim of allegory.
Now, once we believe the lie of the prince of this world, Satan, that those early chapters of Genesis can't be taken literally, it's just symbols, it's just poetry, the foundation of the Christian faith begins to crumble. So Answers in Genesis has this nice overhead, and many Christians, we shoot at the issues. We should shoot at abortion and euthanasia and those kinds of things. Some of us are asleep in the top of our tower. We're not doing much of anything. We have a tower of Christianity. It's built on a foundation of rock. And yet, the humanists, the evolutionists, They're shooting our foundation out from under us, those early chapters of Genesis, whereas their foundation is built on man's truth, man's word is made on sand. And we can shoot their foundation out from under them, but most of us aren't doing that. And so some of us shoot each other. Some of us are shooting at nothing at all. Some of us are shooting our own foundation out from under us. I would say that's theistic evolution. That's progressive creationism. We're shooting our own foundation. And so we need to get back to believing exactly what the Bible says.
Fact is, I would agree entirely. If, as a Christian, you take the Old Testament, specifically Genesis, to be allegorical, then you have lost your basis for sin entering the world, which requires the blood of Christ to remove. No creation, no Eden. No Eden, no fall. No fall, no sin. No sin, no Christ. So if you take that part to be allegory, then the rest must become allegory or simply be pointless, lose its purpose. Now, a good allegory should convey something to the reader or the listener. It should teach you better principles or help you understand a different perspective. In considering that, what does the Bible actually give us? Well, it supports the slaughter of captive women and children, excluding the virgin girls who are to be spared to be raped by their conquerors. It actively condones slavery in the New Testament, and God is very clear as to what he means by slavery, as rules are laid down in the Old Testament. If you are Hebrew, special conditions applied around how long you could be kept as a slave. Otherwise, you were their property indefinitely, and either way, they could still beat you to within an inch of your life and get away with it scot-free. So you have no moral ground to stand on when it comes to the Bible, making allegory completely pointless. If the Bible is allegory, get rid of that sucker as quick as you can. So to recap, if Genesis goes out as not factual, so does the rest of the Bible, and all that leaves is allegory. And yet even that allegory is worthless, it's outdated, it's cruel, and has no use. A wishful part of me wants to call it inhuman, but that would be a denial of its very human origins and allow for the mistakes of the past to be repeated. So maybe I stand corrected. Maybe it does have a use in reminding us just how dark times once were when religion ruled the world, before science burst through the shadows to illuminate not just our world, but the entire universe from which we had shut ourselves away from. And with that, I think we've done enough for today. So I will see you all in the next video. This is Essence of Thought. Take care and out.